This Dust Bowl. This story took a pretty long time with lots of rewrites and editing. I worked on it for a whole year off and on. It's based on fact as best I can remember, and this is true with most of my stories. It's called My Years in the Dust Bowl. When I was in the second grade, we moved from the cattle ranch and farm into the town of Dalhart. The owners of the cattle ranch had moved their headquarters near Amarillo, so my dad had to find some other source of income. He did odd jobs wherever he could find them until he got a job in a large station and auto storage warehouse. He pumped gas, fixed flats, and some repairs. His pay was $18 for a 6-day, 10-hour week. 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. It was more than he was making on the farm, and we seemed to be better off. There had been 2 or 3 seasons of sandstorms and crops were poor, which was another reason why we had to move off the farm. Now our new house was near the edge of town and was only a few blocks from my school, which I was very happy about. No more getting up at 5 o'clock so I could catch the bus a mile from our house. I usually got home around sundown. The new house had only 1 bedroom and a living room. As I remember, the kitchen was rather large with a small back porch. There was a garage attached to one side of the house, which my parents made into a bedroom for my 2 brothers and me. My parents slept in the bedroom and my sister slept in the living room on a single mattress pad. I don't know exactly what time of year this was. I'd say it was probably in early spring or even a bit later, because my memory tells me that there were some storms just before we moved into town. It wasn't too many weeks before we had a huge sandstorm blow in. On the farm we couldn't see the approaching storms because of the hills, but the town was set on the flat plains and you could see for miles. As a result, we could see the storm building and rolling hours before it hit town. In fact, we saw this storm in the early afternoon and it did not hit until after dark. I was playing in the yard with some kids from the neighborhood whom I knew from school when I first noticed the storm. It looked like a dark cloud, only it was sitting on the ground instead of hanging in the sky. I said, "Look at that." And the kids said, "Don't worry, it won't be here for hours." They had already adapted to those oncoming storms. As it got closer and closer, it became darker, and not only was it moving toward us, it was moving inside itself, like it was boiling up out of the ground. And you know, that was exactly what it was doing. By the time it got dark and we went into the house, that rolling and boiling mass looked like it was from the ground clear up to the sky. I have since read that some of those storms were over 2 miles high. Well, as I said before, my brothers and I slept in the attached garage. It had 1 small window and a single lift-up door. This was not an airtight room, so to keep us warm, my dad covered our bed with a large tarp or canvas. We didn't know it then, but that tarp also served to help keep the dust out of our bed. Also, we didn't use them during this storm, but later, in future storms, my mother gave us moistened towels or washcloths to put over our faces to help. This helped more than anything to keep breathing easier and keep the dust out of our noses and mouths. Sometimes there would be a thick cake of moist dust on that wash rag. When those storms blew in and the house filled with that fine dust, you could barely see the person next to you, even with the light on. Sometimes you could hold your hand in front of your face and you could not see it, even if you touched your nose. It was hard. If it is hard for you to believe this, I now show you a clip from a documentary about the Dust Bowl showing a man, Jesse White, who lived in my hometown. He and his family were featured all through the documentary. After the storm, there were piles of sand against fences, buildings, and in ditches. Some were 2, 3, and 4 feet high. It was the worst storm to date. A vacant lot next to our house had every bit of the topsoil blown away, leaving nothing but hard clay, almost like concrete. I'll never forget it because we played on that lot most of the time. Now it was so hard and uneven, it no longer was a good place play area, and it remained a wind-blown lot as long as we lived there. The winds in that storm were so severe and lasted all that night, all the next day, and into the next night. And I remember my brothers and sister and I all coughed a lot during those years. The storms had only been coming a few years until we started having coughing spells. We coughed and spit and choked, sometimes spitting up sand and saliva mud balls or just mushy goo. My mom fixed a mixture of lard, coal oil, and turpentine she gave us in hopes it would help clear our throats and make the coughing a little easier. We sometimes coughed so hard and so long it seemed to take away our strength. I don't remember how much lard or how much coal oil was in that mixture, but it sure tasted awful. I do remember it helped a little and made us spit up more film. She warmed the mixture in a pan and gave it to us in tablespoon doses. Let me tell you, we held our noses when we took it. The first year we lived in that house, we had a sandstorm every other week or so, and they got bigger and stronger. The next year, they more than doubled. The documentary said we had 14 storms in 1932, and in 1933 we had 34, and then it got worse. Sometimes the wind blew and stirred up the sand for 2 or 3 days or more at a time. That dust was so fine it was like face powder. It got so bad everything you ate tasted gritty. So many people got sick with congestion and lung problems that it was later called black pneumonia. The wind was so strong and the dust was so thick a person caught out in it could get disorientated and lost. There were stories about people who did get lost and were later found suffocated. There were cars that had a lot of their paint beat off by that ferocious sand. Our license plate was so beat that some of the numbers were unlegible. There were lots of cattle and other livestock that died in those storms. Their noses and mouths were just full of sand, as was their lungs and stomachs. Lots of people also died of that black pneumonia, many of them children, as they were the most vulnerable. Now, we lived in that house until early 1935, at which time my parents bought a small 2-room house that was out closer to the city limits. It was on the other side of the school, but was a couple of blocks closer to the school. It was on a large lot with a cow pen and a detached garage. The garage was attached to a small barn in the cow pen, and the only indoor plumbing in the house was a cold water faucet to the kitchen. And the water from the kitchen sink drained into a hole or a septic tank in the backyard, and as that septic tank was only 4 feet deep, it drained into a small ditch which ran through the property and emptied onto a vacant lot below our property.